Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and hi if you're new here, I'm Jade, and it is time for December's wrap up. It feels weird because I'm filming this in 2026 and I'm talking about 2025, but obviously it is time, now it's the beginning of 2026, to reflect on 2025, starting with my wrap up for the month to finish the 2025 wrap ups of the whole entire year. Before we get too far into it, I do have a confession to make. I have, for the second month running, failed on my TBR. The TBR jar picked Book Lovers, which I did not get round to reading in December, but I did add Book Thief, which I missed the month before, so I'm not too far behind. And I will move Book Lovers to January. I just ran out of time. I had so much to read. I'd promised for a couple of ARC reads. I obviously wanted to get my holiday reads in, and things were just a little bit busier and crazier than I expected. So yeah, that's how we're starting things. However, I did have some really good reads, and I was kind of thinking of how to talk about them today, because obviously usually I will talk about all my reads in the order I read them, and I'm going to kind of do that, but I'm going to do all reads that I read in order that aren't Christmas books, and then the latter half of the video is going to be the Christmas reads, so that if they don't interest you, you don't have to stick around and watch everything. But I finally had a day off today, so I was like, let's just throw some loungewear on, get cozy, and chat books, because that's my favorite thing to do. So my first read of December was Hart's Brimstone. A few of you have been asking about my opinion on this book. I obviously did a video about all the plot holes in Quicksilver, and I know a few of you have been wondering if I spotted any in here. So just a quick summary of that. There are some typos in here. Yes, there are some little mistakes. I didn't notice anything massive like I potentially noticed with Quicksilver. I think there's a moment a character is in the wrong place here, and there is quite a few spelling errors, but other than that, I really didn't notice much. But I haven't gone back through and reread anything. Like when I did my Quicksilver analysis, I was just so aware of the mistakes that I kind of reread to really dig them out. And the whole Quicksilver timeline not working thing that I spoke about in that video is kind of explained in Brimstone. I've got to say, I think it was like an afterthought. I think Hart realised her mistake and threw things in here to sort of explain it away. If I'm honest, I could be wrong there, but that's how it feels. But yeah, the timeline is sort of explained. Again, I haven't deep dived to double check that it actually all works. If you'd like me to do that, let me know if that interests you, and I'll make a video on it. But I just haven't had time, and it will have to be once I'm back from my trip to the UK. But anyway, getting into Brimstone, I did give it 4 stars, and now I look back on it, I think I might be a little bit generous, just a little bit. I obviously can't talk much about the plot as it is a sequel, but it is a fantasy series, a romantasy series, for those that don't know, and it has like a little bit of spice. And honestly, the first book really gripped my attention. I love the storyline, it was just the plot holes bugged me, but I still loved it. So I was really excited to read this one. I gotta say with Brimstone, I found it a little bit slow to start. I thought the pacing was kind of off. There was a lot of potential plot lines that just never developed that I really wanted to see, which disappointed me a little bit as the book was going on. However, the further I got through the book, the better it was getting, and the ending was amazing. And of course it ends on a cliffhanger, so now I have to wait for the next one. But I do believe the third part of this trilogy is due out in 2026, so I haven't got long to wait, really. So I'll give Hart that. She's writing at a good pace for fans. Maybe not the best pace for no errors, though. But I think if you like Quicksilver, this is worth a read. It is worth continuing the series. But like I said, just for me, the pacing was a little bit off. It was just kind of slow to start. There were some storylines I would have liked to see more of, but the ending was really gripping. Like, I couldn't put it down gripping. And that's kind of why I ended up with 4 stars, because I think before that I probably would have given it a 3, but then the end was so good, it was like a 5-star ending, so I just went with 4. But I think maybe I should have given it 3.75, because it was much more towards the end I really got hooked. But yeah, like I said, if you want any sort of deep dives, anything into this, let me know. But if not, we're just going to keep moving right along now with this video. So the next non-Christmas book I read was Simply More by Cynthia Erivo. This is kind of an autobiography by her, but I wouldn't really describe it as like a full autobiography. It's quite short, and it's definitely just like a summary of certain areas of her life. I have given it 5 stars because generally I do with things that are, about someone's personal life, because who am I to judge their personal life? And I think what she does say is really interesting. I loved reading it. As I said, short, quick read, but just great hearing about her life. She starts talking about her childhood, how then she got into theatre, like what her training was. And I just found that all really fascinating. And then sort of her first jobs, how she's treated as a Black woman in the industry. Like there's some really interesting topics in there. I am a huge Cynthia Erivo fan. I actually first saw her in a concert in 2011, I think it was, maybe 2012. And she was singing in a Scott Allan concert, and her performance blew me away. And ever since then, I've kind of followed her career. And I was so excited when she got cast in Wicked because she totally deserves that. She is so talented. I'm sure if most people are at all interested in this, it's because of the Wicked side of things. And it does touch on it a little bit, but there isn't like huge detail, I will say, about Wicked. A lot for me of the interest came from like her childhood and growing up. So yeah, but overall a great read. If you're at all interested in the performing arts, I think it's definitely worth a read. And then my next read was Wisteria. And I am so happy, but also kind of sad at the same time that I have now finished this trilogy. So I read the entirety of the Belladonna series by Adalyn Grace over 2025, and I have to say it's up there with one of my favourite series ever. I like that it's a mix of genres. It sort of mixes historical fiction because it's set in this sort of Regency era. It also has magic, so it sort of has that fantasy element. And then it's also a romance too. There's romance plots. Honestly, it just mixes things so well. It just keeps it interesting. Of course, because this is the third book, I can't talk too much about it again, or the plot, because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone. What I will say is it follows a different character to the beginning of the series. I don't think I've really read many series where you kind of follow a different character as the main protagonist throughout the series, and the fact that this one changes and still hooks my attention, I think is amazing. I honestly loved all of the books. Like I can't really pick a favourite. Probably the first and this one are slightly got an edge above the second one maybe, but I loved all of them. I'm pretty sure I've given them all 5 stars. This one's obviously 5 stars as I'm rating it today. But yeah, thrilled that I have read it, but sad that it's over because I adored this. But I do believe Adalyn Grace has a new book coming out this year, so therefore I am very excited to dive into some more of her books when that eventually releases. And then my next read was Wicked by Gregory Maguire. I was so apprehensive to read this. I read Elfie earlier this year. If you weren't with me and my channel then, you won't know, but basically I read Elfie. I skipped ahead to Elfie because I'd bought the book and it was just pretty and I really wanted to read it after the hype of the movies and everything, and I just didn't like Elfie at all. I just felt like I didn't like how it was written. It just felt a little bit clumsy. I don't know. There was just nothing engaging about it. So I'm going to start off by saying, do not make the same mistake I did. If you've been wanting to dive into the Wicked books, start with Wicked. Don't start with Elfie. This, of course, is the first book in the whole series. Elfie is more like a novella, I guess you could say. But for me, now that I've read this, I would say that Elfie was just a cash grab based around the hype of the movies. I don't think it was needed. Yeah, that's my opinion. That's all I'm going to say on that. But yeah, this was surprisingly written really well, actually. And yes, I didn't love it. I've given it 3.25 because I enjoyed it, but there was nothing like special about it for me. But there were some parts that I was really absorbed in the book, but the pacing was a bit hit and miss. So sometimes I was bored and sometimes I was like really gripped into a chapter. So yeah, for me, it was just like the pacing wasn't at all consistent, but to me, it was worth a read. I'm so glad that I know now the comparison of the book to the musical. I am a huge musical theatre fan. I am a singing teacher, so naturally I've done a lot of theatre. So yeah, I really wanted to know the difference. I came into reading this knowing it was much darker and very different. I do prefer the plot of the musical, which is very different, but this does fit better with The Wizard of Oz, I think. It's just, I like the cuteness of the musical that we don't get in this book. The musical overall is like, set around Shiz and their time at the school, whereas that is a very, 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 very small part of this book, and then it goes off into a completely different story. So yeah, bear in mind it is very, very, very different to the movies and the musical if you do want to pick this up, but I think it's worth a read. I thought it was decent. And then the next book I read is another I read on my Kindle, which was an ARC I was given, and it is called Change of Heart by Lani Roxanne. As you can see, I gave it a 3.75 star. I thought it was quite a solid read. The only reason for me that it didn't get any higher was I did find the protagonist a little annoying at times. So in this book, we mainly follow Emma, who is returning home. We learn she's returning home after many years living in New York, and that is because she has been diagnosed with heart failure. The book is written from a dual perspective, also from a guy called Alex, and it comes apparent very quickly that these two used to have something together in the past, and there seems to be sort of some animosity there. Emma has not told Alex about her heart failure diagnosis, but Alex was raised sort of by her family because he had a sort of wasteful family who didn't care about him. So he was almost raised like a brother to the whole family. So yeah, when we realized there was obviously some kind of romantic connection between the characters, I think I wanted a bit more to know what happened there, because their sort of love-hate behavior towards each other just seems quite extreme at times. Like they overreact to situations so often that I just kind of found myself getting frustrated with them. But I feel like it's because I was missing some of their backstory somehow. We explained it a little bit, but I just feel like there's more to it. I would love like a prequel to this of those characters as teenagers, so that we get to see Emma and Alex as teenagers, and I think that would be great. But yeah, this story ultimately is following Emma and her health journey with her heart failure. Ultimately, she needs a new heart, and at her relationship with Alex and how they sort of rekindle their past. I like that it had the medical aspect to it. I felt like that was dealt with quite delicately most of the time, and there are some really, really, really heartwarming scenes in the book. But yeah, for me, the characters were just a little bit annoying, and I feel I need that backstory. And then the final non-Christmassy book I read was The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. So this is the one I missed from my TBR last month, and I'm so glad I finally picked it up. In case you missed it, I have owned this book for years. This is a very old British edition of the book, and I bought it not long after I saw the movie because I loved the movie, but I wanted to leave it long enough that I didn't really remember the movie when I read the book. And when the TBR jar prompt picked this one out because it was the most rated book on Goodreads, it seemed like the right time, because I honestly was like, I know it's a war story set in World War II about a girl that steals books, but that's really all I remembered. So it was really nice diving into this and kind of forgetting a lot of it. So the first thing I want to say is it is written from a really interesting perspective. I don't want to say that in case you haven't read it or watched the movie, and so that you can like dive in and see that for yourself. But overall, we follow a girl called Liesel, and she is sort of dropped off with this family who have, I guess, adopted her. And the family are a little bit rough around the edges. The mother, she doesn't seem to sort of get on with quite as well, but she gains quite a close relationship with who she then, begins to call her papa. And we soon learn that she was never taught to read. She's mocked at school for this because she doesn't know how to read, and she really has this desire to want to read. So she ends up sort of trying to get hold of books, which are a rare commodity, for poor people back in that time, especially in a war-torn country. So she ends up sort of stealing books from various places, and her papa, who isn't the best reader, still helps her learn to read, and she actually becomes quite good at reading and writing. Liesel and her family are German, so they are on that side of the war, but they clearly don't really agree with what's going on, and they do end up hiding a Jew who is the son of a friend of her father's from the First World War. So he feels like he sort of owes him something, and they really try to help. And I feel like that's as much as I can really say without, spoiling anything. She makes a friendship with a guy called Rudy. There's some really nice moments in there about relationships and sort of how it was at the time. What I will say is, if you don't know your World War II history very well at all, it might not explain a lot in here. It's kind of just presumed you know what happened with, the Jewish camps and Hitler and everything, which I feel most people do. But if you don't, I feel like you do need that history to understand this book. But other than that, honestly, it's an amazing read. I do really enjoy my historical fiction set around the World War II era. That's what I've studied the most. That's kind of the main part of history. I think that really intrigues me because I just can't get over how horrendous it was, and that people, so many people, turned a blind eye to it. I have been to Auschwitz, and it's really, really humbling. And yeah, it sounds wrong to say I love stories set in that time, but I do, because I just think there's so much to learn from that part of history. And so they are all the books that I read that weren't Christmassy. So if you are not interested in Christmas books at all to add to your next year's TBR, then please feel free to leave, and I will continue for those of you that love Christmas books generally as much as I do. So the first Christmas read of December for me was BK Borison's Good Spirits. I feel like a lot of you would have seen this everywhere. Quite a few of you probably have read it. It came out this year. Everyone just seemed to be getting it. My online book club decided to do it. So I thought, hey, why not? Let's join in. I loved First Time Caller by BK Borison this year, which was my first BK Borison novel. So I was really excited to get into another book of theirs. This one is essentially like a retelling of A Christmas Carol, but with sort of different characters, but it uses the concept of the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. However, we focus around the ghost of Christmas past here, who is Noah, who is one of our protagonists and one of the perspectives that we read from. The other perspective is Harriet, and Noah has been sent to Harriet. He is her ghost of Christmas past, and presumably, she's done something wrong. That's why the ghosts usually visit, but they're trying to figure out why he has been sent to Harriet. It seems a bizarre situation because she doesn't really seem to have done anything. And then naturally, there's a bit of an attraction between them, and it's sort of their story in navigating themselves as people, their relationship, and trying to figure out why he has been sent to Harriet in the first place. It definitely has that kind of Hallmark-esque kind of feel to it, and it really, really gripped me. It has a really, really strong start actually to the book, but I will say I found the middle part a little bit slow. I loved how it ended, loved how it began, but the middle was a little slow for me, and that's kind of why I ended up with 3.75. So not a bad rating at all. I still enjoyed it, but I just felt there was parts that could have been better. There was some really good humor in the book, which I really appreciated, but there was another couple of things that I didn't like so much. One part is Noah is like, years and years and years old. He originally died and became a ghost many, many years before. So he often shows like that because he's not aware so much of things like when phones ring or like ring doorbells, for example. He finds these like fascinating because he's like, he didn't know they existed, right? But there is a lot of the way he acts and talks, especially with the spicy scenes, that I just feel doesn't make him seem that old. He seems too modern, so it just feels a little bit inconsistent. But I overall did really enjoy their relationship. It's just that his character did seem a little inconsistent with his sort of vibe, because I felt like sometimes he felt very old school and sometimes he didn't at all. And then the only other thing that it lacked a little bit for me is while it uses the whole Ghost of Christmas Past thing and is obviously set near Christmas, there wasn't many like what I'm going to call festive scenes. Like for me, when I pick up a really cheesy Christmas novel, I want those scenes with snow and Christmas lights and things like that. And I just felt like this didn't have much of that in there. So I would have liked a little bit more to make it feel a little bit more festive. But I appreciated the concept. I still enjoyed it. As I said, gave it 3.75. So still a pretty good rating. I just felt there could have been more here, but I enjoyed it overall. And then the next Christmas novel I read was Yule Be Mine by Piper Rayne. This was actually one of my in-person book club's picks. They picked it because it's quite short and we were meeting like earlier in the month than we usually would. But honestly, it probably turned out to be like one of my better Christmas novels of the year. As I said, it is quite short. It's under 200 pages, I think. I think it was almost at the 200-page mark. But I found it really cute. It definitely has those Hallmark vibes again, but it has all those festive scenes that I felt I was kind of missing in Good Spirits. So again, we have our male protagonist and our female protagonist, and we follow Carter from the male perspective, and he has arrived in somewhere called Mistletoe Falls for a friend's wedding. And then we have Ashley, who is the twin of the bride, and she runs a B&B. She lives in Mistletoe Falls, which is where the wedding's going to be held. And we kind of quickly learn that there is a bit of history between these two characters. Well, Carter arrives for the wedding. His hotel is actually accidentally double booked, so he ends up having to go and stay with Ashley at her B&B, and they didn't want this. They find it awkward because they have this history behind them. However, obviously they're there for the wedding, so they have to make it work for their friends. However, things get in the way, and the bride and groom are really late, so they still need to wedding plan. So Ashley and Carter have to sort of work together to get everything ready for the wedding, and they sort of have to put their differences aside. And of course, therefore, we have our little bit of our spicy romance novel beginning. So yes, there is spice. If you don't like spice, you're probably not going to like this one, but I enjoyed it. And ultimately, this just does include quite a few festive scenes. There's lots with snow and lights and festive things. So yeah, overall, I just thought it was written really well. And especially for a shorter story, I thought was well worth the read. So I gave it 4.25 stars. And then for my other in-person book club, we read Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh. I gave this one 4 stars. The only reason I think the other one was better for me, is it did have a little bit more of that sort of festive feel to it, but this one still ultimately did, especially the more I got into the novel. Again, a very Hallmark style kind of book, and this time we follow two characters called Andrew and Molly, and we learn that they always share a flight from Chicago to Dublin every Christmas, and they always sit together because they're always on this flight. They are both Irish people that live, therefore fly back to their family every Christmas. And the reason they first started getting talking was because Andrew was dating her friend, and her friend sort of messed him around, I guess you could say. And Molly felt really bad for him. And then they sort of ended up talking because they sort of knew each other. And then as the years go on and they fly a lot together, they become friends. However, this particular year that they go to fly, there are terrible storms and all the flights get cancelled. Getting home to the family means a lot to Andrew, and Molly knows this, so she pulls a lot of strings to sort of make it happen. They end up going on this whole long journey together where they end up having to like fly to Paris and then change from there to the UK and then to Ireland. So they have this sort of long journey together, traveling throughout the Christmas period, and their relationship sort of grows, I guess, and develops as they experience this together. There were some very laugh out loud moments in this book. I really appreciated that. And yeah, overall was quite a heartwarming story. So yeah, nothing really wrong with it. I'd say a good one to pick up if you're looking for something cute and festive. And then the next one I have is Hart for Christmas by Sophie Jamain. I said that really British because she's French, so it's probably Sophie Jamain. But anyway, this is one of those Advent books, so it gave me a chapter to read each month. They were awful to try and separate the pages. Didn't appreciate that, so now it looks like a mess, but it was fun to read. I've got to say, I saw a lot of people talking about this book, saying that they DNF'd it, that they thought it was terrible, and I just think it was a little harsh of people. I have to say, it's not written great, but it is a translation, and it's also written to be an Advent novel, so it has to fit into 24 chapters. They sort of need a cliffhanger at the end of each one. Like, it was a very sort of like forced style, I guess you could say. So I didn't have like super high hopes of it, but it achieved what I think it needed to do, which was leave me on a little bit of a cliffhanger, looking forward to the next chapter the next day. And yes, it wasn't the best written thing. If I read it straight through, I probably wouldn't think a lot of it, but I think it did what it needed to do for Advent. I enjoyed it as like a little Advent calendar thing. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't want to say too much about the plot in case anyone wants to pick this up next year as an Advent book for themselves. But ultimately, we follow April. She goes to stay with her dad. She has heart issues, and therefore she has to be careful. And she kind of lives in fear a lot because she lives with her mother now, further away. Seeing, her best friend, her best friend's brother, her dad, and everything, it just starts to make her sort of like come out of her shell a little bit, I guess you could say, and she tries to navigate her health, relationships, everything else. But that's all I'm going to say because, yeah, I don't want to spoil anything in case anyone wants to pick this up. But ultimately, I don't think the story was terrible. I just don't think it's the best written. But I think for what it is, it's decent. So I gave it a 3-star rating because it does what it needs to do. And then the final book I'm going to talk about today, although I can't talk about it too much because it is part of a series, is Holly, which is the Christmas novella of the Belladonna series. So obviously I just spoke about Wisteria, and yeah, this comes after Wisteria. It is the novella, but I will stress this: if you go into the series, this has to be read last or you will get so many spoilers. Therefore, I obviously can't talk about it much because I would spoil things for the whole trilogy if I talk about it too much, but it's just a nice sort of festive later read. It sort of adds a little bit more to the plot of the trilogy, but obviously isn't as plot heavy. That's kind of why I went for 4.5 because I did really enjoy it, but of course it isn't really for the plot. It's a nice cute side Christmas story, and it done exactly what I needed it to do. It was lovely to revisit the world because I love it so much and have that other part, and then maybe I'll get another novella for it because I do love the Belladonna series a lot. But they are the total of 11 books that I read for December. As I said, book lovers will shift over to January. Hopefully I get time to read it. January is a bit of a crazy month because I am going to be away in the UK for a long time and I will be reading things on my Kindle. That is why there has not been a TBR jar video for picking my January reads, if you're wondering where that is, because I will not have time to have physical books. I will be reading off my Kindle, and I didn't feel like there would be like that much to pick from, so I figured I would just read what I feel like on my Kindle as I travel because I don't know how much I'm going to get through, and then it takes the pressure off. And then we will do the TBR jar back for February. But anyway, I hope you read some really good things to end your 2025 as well. I feel like overall I had a pretty good month. And yeah, I will see you again real soon. Bye!